Hello, welcome. I'm so glad to have you back with us for another session of On Book, the Old Globe Shakespeare Reading Group. My name is Danielle Mages Amato. I'm the literary manager and dramaturg of the Globe. And on behalf of our staff and board and artists, I want to welcome you and thank you so much for joining us. This week, we're continuing our discussion of Henry V. And one of the things that's come up in both of our previous discussions of the play is, of course, the opening speech, in which the chorus comes out and speaks directly to the audience. And of course, talks about war, but also a lot about theater. So I've invited a guest today who can talk to us more about both of those things and what they might be doing in the same play. So I'm very excited to welcome Professor DJ Hopkins to the group today. So if I can get you on here, DJ. Hello.
Hi,
I'm going to make it smaller so I can see your face better. There we go. Hi, DJ.
Hey, good to see you, Danielle.
Professor Hopkins, I will give you a little introduction now. Professor Hopkins teaches in the School of Theater, Television, and Film at San Diego State University. He was the director of that school for several years. He's a scholar whose research focuses on Shakespeare and performance, especially contemporary productions of Shakespeare and Shakespeare on film, and the relationship between performance and urban space. So if you like what he has to say today, you can check out his book, City Stage Globe, or one of his edited Performance in the City collections. DJ holds a MFA and a PhD, both from UC San Diego. So thank you so much for being here.
It's a real pleasure to be joining you, broadcasting live from my garage.
Yay, as are we all in some form or fashion.
Right.
I set up, when I introduced the session, some of the things that we're hoping to talk about today. So maybe we could start where the play starts, with this big speech at the beginning that brings together theater and war, theater and politics. And I'm wondering, what do you think those things are doing together in this play, and at what points do we see them maybe working together most closely?
I think it's a great question, and I love teaching this play. I love teaching the prologue, especially. I'm just finishing a class, a graduate seminar at San Diego State, in which I talk about Shakespeare in performance. And this was one of the first things we looked at, this play and the prologue to it. I love the way Shakespeare talks about theater here. And he's talking directly, he has this character come out who isn't really who isn't at all a historical character. The chorus is more like a sort of narrative function more than a character. And the chorus comes out and talks to the audience and really apologizes elaborately to the audience for all the things that aren't going to actually be on stage. Would it be all right if I read a little bit of this?
Yes,
Danielle?
please read.
Okay, so after the "O for a Muse of Fire" that so many people know, the chorus wishes for a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, and monarchs to behold the swelling scene. Then should the warlike Harry, like himself, assume the port of Mars. And he goes on from there, but pardon gentles all, the flat unraised spirits that have dared on this unworthy scaffold to bring so great an object. As if Shakespeare really thinks he needs to apologize to his audience that the subject of the play, Henry V, isn't going to be playing the role of Henry V tonight. As if, I'm so sorry, but we're stuck with you as an audience instead of an audience full of kings and queens. I think it's really interesting the way he kind of spells out how theatrical representation works. And I love that he's pointing directly at the scaffold stage. Okay, so here we are at a theater. Mm-hmm. It's not often that a play directly points to the actual occasion of going to a play. But at this time, when Shakespeare was writing this play, he was really interested in theatricality. And all the plays that he wrote in 1599 and 1600 are really actively engaged in that same subject. Have you lost me?
No, I can hear you.
Sorry.
Keep going.
Okay, thanks. According to my screen, I was stalled. So this play, Henry V, was followed by Julius Caesar, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, and then Hamlet. That's a pretty good run of plays. Not bad. I mean, that would be a fantastic career. And it's just a snapshot of Shakespeare in 1599 and 1600. But all these plays, in common with Henry V, are really overtly foregrounding the fact that they are plays, and often making theatricality a theme. making theater a subject of a play. Sometimes we're bringing actors on stage, and using this opportunity to point at the occasion of putting on a play as an opportunity to open up a whole field of conversation for inviting the audience to think about what it means to have theatricality in your daily life.
And would you list those plays for me again, just so I can?
Yes. Just checking in. You can see me, right? Because my
I can
picture
see you
has
and you can hear
frozen.
you. You're all thumbs up. You're all doing great.
So Henry V, we are pretty confident, was performed in 1599. Julius Caesar, we are certain, was performed in 1599 and was in all likelihood the first play performed at the Globe when that opened in that same year. And that was followed by As You Like It and Twelfth Night. And then Hamlet was probably performed for the first time in 1600, 1601. But all these plays have in common the theme of theater, and in many ways inviting the audience to think about life as theatrical.
So are there ways in this play, other than the chorus, who, as we've said, comes back at the beginning of every act and then sort of buttons the play at the end, are there other ways that you see Shakespeare using theater or theatricality to sort of make his points, or as a theme in the play?
Well, I think it's really interesting because it isn't explicit as it is in so many other plays from this period. There aren't actors who come on stage. There isn't a play within the play, as in Hamlet. But as you noticed, each act begins with a chorus, and especially the first chorus at the beginning of Act 1 talks so explicitly about the occasion of coming to a theater. Can we cram within this wooden O the vasty fields of France? But after the chorus talks so explicitly about theater and the occasion of going to a theater and how the theatrical imagination works, then we have these scenes dense with politics. And when we see Henry V interrogating traitors who are still trying to act as though they haven't actually done anything wrong, and he's kind of acting as though he's going along with it. We're invited to see and think about the theatricality of politics and the theatricality of deception and betrayal, especially of close friends. And later in the play, when King Henry goes through the camp right before the Battle of Agincourt, and he's in disguise. It's dark and he's got a cloak on, and he talks with people and listens to people. There's something quite theatrical about that, because nobody knows to whom they're speaking. And then later, the Crispian's Day speech is it's so theatrical and so dramatic. I think that we are invited to change the way we look at the play. Nobody comes out right before that speech and says, hey, notice this is a super theatrical moment. But because every act is framed by this character who not only tells us what's going on, gives us exposition, but reminds us that we're at a play, we're invited to look at every scene that follows through the same kind of theatrical lens.
That's so interesting. It does seem to mirror, when you list those other plays from this same period, I do see those connections, like the women in disguise of Twelfth Night and As You Like It, the sort of like dual watching that we're doing when we know something that other characters on stage don't know, and the way that we watch the scene differently because we're watching that play out. And some similar things with traitors and betrayal and people, I guess you could call it two-faced, of Julius Caesar. Some of those things really do feel like common threads that play through those plays.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, in many ways, Julius Caesar is a play about the theater. When Antony and Caesar are trash talking Cassius, one of the worst things that Caesar can say about Cassius, I mean, we often say he has a lean and hungry look. That's a very quotable one. But Caesar goes on to tell Antony he loves not plays as you do. You know, in Act 1 of a play, a character who doesn't like plays.
Fired.
Well, seriously, in 1599, Elizabethan audiences, they loved theater. Theater was a major cultural force in London in 1599. A character who doesn't like plays is obviously being set up for a fall.
Mm-hmm.
But later, Cassius, the one who says he doesn't like plays, after he has killed Caesar, he stands over the body and he's washing his hands in Caesar's blood in order to prepare himself for this theatrical moment that's going to follow. And Cassius says, "How many ages hence shall this our lofty scene be acted over in states unborn and accents yet unknown?" In other words, he's saying, at what future time will this murder of Caesar be acted in a play, in a language that none of us ancient Romans can think of? Well, anyone in that audience and anyone reading or seeing the play today knows that that's exactly what is happening in the moment that you're seeing the play. Yeah. So there are these wonderful moments of awareness of the theatricality of what they're doing. Now, this isn't a moment in which Cassius turns to the audience and delivers that as a monologue of sorts to the audience. Cassius doesn't have the capacity to address the audience that a Hamlet does, or that a Rosalind does, that Prospero does, that Richard III does. But the play shows this continual awareness of theatricality. Brutus's speech explaining the murder, the assassination of Caesar is terrible and boring, but he's kind of got the audience coming to his side, and then he leaves the thing to Antony. And it's really the first time we get a look at Antony in the play. And no surprise, this is the guy who does like theater. So the fact that Antony is a warrior and a general becomes superfluous to the play. The reason Antony wins by the end of Julius Caesar, spoiler alert, Antony's forces win, is because he has command not of the armies, not of the military forces, but because in Act 3 he has command of live performance. He knows how to work an audience in ways that Brutus does not. And that whole scene turns the audience, the scene in which Antony is giving the funeral oration for Caesar, friends, Romans, countrymen. That whole scene turns the audience into the Roman crowd. And it isn't a moment in which Antony is talking to the actual audience there in the Globe in London in 1599. But he is addressing that audience in the Globe in 1599 as if they were the crowd of Romans standing in front of the body of Caesar. And it becomes this wonderful moment of powerful theatricality.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, and maybe, I don't know if we're ready to turn to the question yet of characters in Shakespeare's plays or actors in Shakespeare's plays addressing us as the audience sitting in the theater. But, you know, I think that there's a term that we use in the contemporary theater of just the fourth wall, and this idea that the play is happening in this hermetically sealed box on the stage, and there's a wall that exists between us as the audience and the actors on the stage, and both we and the actors are pretending that we're not in the theater. So obviously Shakespeare's theater didn't function in that way, and I wonder if we could talk a little bit about characters speaking to the audience here in Henry V and even in the other plays, and this idea of, you know, the relationship maybe in Henry V of the play that's taking place, the story of Henry V, and the story of us as audience members sitting and watching the play.
Yes. Often the characters who address the audience are main characters who seem to have a kind of control over their own narrative. And the one who strikes me most forcefully is Richard III, who until the end of that play seems like he has almost a playwright's control over what's happening in his story. And he loves to turn to the audience and gleefully report the horrible things that he's just done, and enjoy that satisfaction with the audience. Hamlet does that in a similar vein, as does Rosalind in As You Like It. They have this capacity, it seems, to control what's happening in their universe to one degree or another, and talking to the audience is part of that. Shakespeare's plays in the public theater were on what we would today call a thrust stage. So there were groundlings standing around the stage on three sides, and then tiers of audience members watching also on three sides. So there was no fourth wall like in a proscenium theater in that realism. But there was this capacity to move between being located in a really consistent fictional narrative location where characters are talking about things that have nothing to do with London circa 1599 and nothing to do with London. And then the capacity for an actor to walk away from that space and maybe move downstage closer to the actual audience and have a conversation that seems to be moving fluidly between that fixed fictional narrative location and the actual occasion of performance in London.
And
so
do
it's
we
not
see
a fourth wall. So it's not a fourth wall, but yeah.
No. Do we see that at all in Henry V, you feel? I mean, obviously we have the character of the chorus who is very much not, maybe he's just with us. He's hanging with us and watching the play and sort of like doesn't necessarily move into that fictional space, but can narrate that fictional space. But I'm trying to remember if there are other characters who explicitly speak to the audience or speak with us as audience members.
I don't see that in quite the same way in Henry V or Julius Caesar. But then we get to As You Like It, as we move through that roster of amazingly theatrical plays at the turn of the century. And Rosalind often speaks to the audience, in addition to characters who don't speak to the audience using theatricality as a theme. Most famously, All the World's a Stage and All the Men and Women Merely Players, a line not spoken by Rosalind, but by another character, Jaques, who doesn't turn to the audience, doesn't seem to have that capacity to share some secret of the story with the audience. But at the end of that play, as someone noted in the comments here, at the end of As You Like It, there's a famous epilogue in which
on the screen so we can talk about it.
Yeah.
Wasn't it a convention among Shakespeare's contemporary playwrights to have apologetic prologues or epilogues? Isn't that why the chorus says he's speaking prologue-like? As You Like It, epilogue also excuses a bad play. I was sort of joking with this about this with DJ before we came on and saying, like, there does seem to be, like, with this apologetic prologue in Henry V, where we say, oh, we're sorry, we just have this wooden stage where we can just do absolutely anything in the entire world. And, then we get to the end and we're like, oh, sorry, we're just doing it's a sort of convention, apology and prayer for applause and acceptance.
Right. It was absolutely conventional to begin a play and end a play with absolutely routine boilerplate requests for be quiet and enjoy the show. And then now that you've enjoyed the show, get loud and applaud for us and throw some money our way.
Unwrap your candies and find your
Yes. It was also routine, even at the end of Julius Caesar. This is actually a well-documented moment. At the end of such a serious tragedy where the stage is littered with bodies at the end of the play, everybody hopped up and did a merry jig. We know that Julius Caesar ended with a merry jig, and it's not surprising from what we know most plays did. It was simply conventional. But I think one of the reasons we're reading Shakespeare's plays 400 years later is that Shakespeare took these conventions and did some things that really made them conceptually powerful. I love when the chorus says that he is prologue-like. He is delivering the prologue. The prologue is the prologue. It's not like a prologue, but that's how everything in that prologue works. I'm so sorry that we can't have Henry V playing the role of Henry V. We're just stuck with this guy who happens to be the greatest actor of our age. Sorry. I think Shakespeare is being a bit ironic. I don't think he's really apologizing that you have to imagine horses because they don't have the room for horses on this stage. I think Shakespeare loved the limitations of the platform theater, and I think his audiences liked them too. I think while it's an elaborate set of apologies for what they don't have, I think the prologue at the beginning of Henry V is also a list of the pleasures of performance, the pleasures of the theatrical imagination, and I think the pleasures of the almost sports-like demands and limitations. You're not only seeing people talk about a giant army on horseback in armor, but you're also seeing a bunch of guys, and they would have been all guys, on a platform stage telling an amazing story. You have this double vision. you're seeing both the occasion of going to the theater on the rough stage, and these low-class actors, they were at the bottom of the social ladder, putting on this amazing performance, even while your imagination is invited to expand in the broadest possible ways. I think that's what Shakespeare liked. I think that's what his audiences liked. And I think in the prologue, he's making this list as if they were limitations he needs to apologize for, but I think he's winking at his audience. These are all these are all the reasons that they've come to the theater.
And were you saying something specific about how Rosalind does that in As You Like It in the epilogue? Sorry, I distracted us there.
No, thank you for keeping me on track. Yeah, Rosalind's epilogue is amazing because at the end of the play, it is not the fashion to see the lady the epilogue, but it is no more unhandsome than to see the lord the prologue. Rosalind comes out and she talks about what has just happened, but she's also talking to the audience very directly. And she is inviting them to applaud at the end of the play, but it also seems at points as if she's talking about the men in the audience and the women in the audience, and she even seems to be talking about herself as if she is a female character performed by a man. She even talks about the possibility of having a beard. So it's this wonderful moment in which we get this blurry, this blurry performance of both the character Rosalind and the boy actor playing the character, standing at the edge of the play, at the edge of the stage, talking to the actual audience about the play that has just happened. So it's a wonderful moment, and I think one of the reasons that epilogue stands out is it does all the conventional things. The main character comes out and says, "Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed the show. Now applaud a lot and give us more money." Yes, all those things happen. But also Shakespeare gets to extend this theme of theatricality and the performance of identity. That's so important to that play, and really so important to all the plays at this important point in his career.
That's so interesting. So it is, as you said, taking a very common convention and yet using it in a masterful way to reiterate and enhance the themes that he's playing with in the piece.
Yes.
And there's something I think lovely in this play and in any of the plays that has an epilogue. We think we see the prologues as common in Shakespeare's plays, but about giving us this transition space and this space in which we can have the time and maybe mental processing to, move from the fictional world and time of the play back into ease our transition, as it were.
Yeah.
I can remember many theatrical experiences I've had where the lights come on and I'm like, whoa, I'm not ready. I go outside and I'm like, it's daytime. I'm in San Diego. What is happening? There's something nice about having an epilogue to both ease our way and maybe having him control a little bit how we think about it or how we go off and describe it as we move off into the rest of our day or the rest of our week.
Right. We're decompressing a little bit. And in a play that relies on a lot of historical knowledge, like Henry V, it's useful to find a creative way to fill the audience in on what's happening and where it's happening. Now, Henry V was a famous figure. I like your comparison to the Civil War. If we were showing up at a Civil War play, we'd know, okay, there was the North and the South, and there was Abraham Lincoln. Who else do I need to know about now? So a little exposition helps because the audience for Shakespeare's plays was pretty strictly stratified. Many people in the audience, the best educated people in the audience, would have known English and Latin and maybe some French and would have really enjoyed all the wordplay between English and French.
I was about to say, I hope they knew some French. There's like 2 whole scenes in French, so a lot of jokes that you don't get if you're not speaking French.
I think a lot of people would have known enough French to get the dirty jokes. And everyone in the audience, from the groundlings to the people in the most expensive seats, everyone would have understood how theater worked. As I said earlier, it was such an important part of the culture, much more important at the time for the largest number of people than books and reading. We would, the literacy rate then was much lower than it is now. We might be surprised. There were a lot of people who could read, but the range of reference in a play by Shakespeare is so broad that he's trying to bring along a lot of people, even while there are some references that only a narrow cross-section of the audience will really get. So in a play where he really needs everybody to come along for a history play, he provides enough exposition in the chorus and elsewhere to help everybody sort of move along. In other plays, he seems less concerned about that. Certainly, As You Like It and Twelfth Night are sort of fantastic invented places. But even Julius Caesar, which relies heavily on historical background, he just assumed people knew. The opening of Julius Caesar doesn't involve a prologue. It involves characters on stage very much, practically indistinguishable from the characters in the audience. So he finds a way to bring them into the world, but he doesn't give them much exposition to start with. He just throws them into the deep end.
As we're sort of coming toward the end of our time, we got another 5 minutes or so. I want to make sure I invite you guys to ask any other questions that you have or make any other observations on this topic that you've noticed. DJ, did you have other specific moments in this play or in other plays that you wanted to take a look at about this same topic?
Well, my students always want to talk about the end of the play, in which Henry V has this long extended scene with Catherine, and it's comedy at the end of this very serious tragedy, very serious history play. There's this long extended two-hander that is really about a courtship. But it's a courtship so framed by politics that there's no way for Catherine to say no.
Yeah.
So it's quite a complicated moment. And if you've seen the film version with Kenneth Branagh, I mean, it's hilarious. Emma Thompson and Kenneth Branagh do a fabulous job. But also, even while we're enjoying the pleasures of this, it's framed within a very serious politics. So I think that moment that so many people enjoy at face value, almost as much as any exchange between Beatrice and Benedict. Nevertheless, I think it's useful to watch that interplay, to see these characters playing roles. This is the way the play ends, other than the chorus's final speech. It ends with this seemingly playful courtship scene. But if we've been watching the theatrical developments and listening to the chorus's recommendations throughout the course of the play, then there's a seriousness to the kind of duel, D-U-E-L, the fencing match between these two characters. That's funny, yes, but if we keep it within that frame, we can see that each character is playing a role within a role, if you will. And I think by the end of the play, it's something that the play has taught us to do. The play has taught us to watch these exchanges theatrically and think about the multiple meanings that are latent in this exchange, seemingly playful exchange.
We have certainly watched Henry through the course of the entire play deploy an entire host of theatrical and tactics against many, many people in many different ways. Some of them positive, you could call them like motivational speeches, and some of them terrifying, like, pretending you don't know your old friend from the last two plays and letting him get hanged for, thievery without or wincing or making any acknowledgement. So I do feel like this is a person we've watched, go under lie to his, soldiers in the way that you pretend you're not who you are, put somebody's glove on somebody else's horse so that somebody will have a fight. I mean, we do watch him sort of create and stage any number of situations, some bloody, some humorous, and now we watch him sort of stage this courtship, which is perhaps an interesting. It's a challenging, I think, watch of that scene where you're like, it's not like, oh, how romantic. It's a little bit like, oh, this guy is staging another type of scene.
Yes, and in England, in London, in 1599, this play would have been a sequel to the first parts of Henry IV, in which this same character, played by the same actor, was much more jovial and comic. They were still history plays. They still had serious moments, but the transformation from the Hal of the Henry IV plays to the king in Henry V is even noted early when the herald from France brings Henry V the gift of tennis balls as a way of marking what a playful fool he's been in the past. And King Henry acknowledges that, I'm not that person anymore. I'm a character in a different play now.
I'm the hero of this play, damn it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But you're right. He does use theatricality in a different way, not the playful way when he was Falstaff's apprentice, but he uses theatricality in a much more serious way. There's a wonderful moment in Bronnach's film of Henry V where Bronnach adds a kind of theatrical moment when Henry is standing outside a town that he has just besieged, and he tells them that tells the leaders of the town that he's about to break down their walls and come in, and they can either let him in peace, or he will and his soldiers. And then he rattles off a list of war crimes that he will instruct his soldiers to commit. And then they say, okay, we cannot defend our town, come in. And then Bronnach's Henry V turns around and goes, whew, as if to say, I'm glad I don't have to do any of that. Or I was bluffing and they bought it. What a relief. So we do see in that moment, Bronnach, and a very astute reader of Shakespeare, adding in this moment of theatricality to the way Henry V navigates leadership and kingship and military power in the play.
Before we close here, I'm going to take this other question from the chat here. This question is, why does Henry V have the chorus come in at the beginning of every act, whereas other plays have only a prologue or the chorus only introducing some acts? Or, I think we see like in Winter's Tale, where we have a sort of chorus-like figure who introduces like a big gap of time. But here we do have it happening really in every single act. Do you have any ideas about either why that might be or how it functions, makes the play work differently?
Sure. I have several immediate responses. The first is, I have no idea. I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But this was not his first history play. He was known at this point in his career as a writer of history plays. He'd written other things, but he was famous. His career was built on history plays. So we can cross off, he didn't know how to write a history play, and he felt anxiety about building in a lot of exposition. That's not the reason. And he was afraid his audience wouldn't know enough. Well, in the very same year, he wrote Julius Caesar with nary a bit of exposition, as I said earlier, thrown into the deep end of Roman history, ready to go. So why is he doing this? It is an excellent question. And my explanation would be that he's enjoying the opportunity to have this explicit theatricality, to have this character who comes on stage who's not part of the story, who's not part of the history, but is part of the theatrical function of the stage, interacting with the audience in this dynamic way and creating these theatrical transitions. I think for me, it's a way to highlight and emphasize the theatricality of the play, as well as moving the play forward and providing exposition.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time here, and I appreciate everybody staying to listen. We're going to continue our conversation about Henry V on Friday with Jacob Gregolia Rosenbaum, who's a fight director and choreographer. He's going to talk a little bit about fight and battle scenes in the history plays in particular. So thanks once again, DJ.
Thank you very much.
And thank you everyone for watching.
Bye.